Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are beginning a new series tonight. We're calling it War and Peace in Jewish Tradition. I have to give credit where credit is due. This was Ephraim's idea. Last week we ended our series on the spiritual nature of water and put a lot of thought into what should come next. And Ephraim thought of this theme. It's very pertinent. As Amy just said, there's discussions quite literally as we speak in the Israeli cabinet over a partial release of the captives. We'll see what happens. But the idea was, since we're in a war, and with the spread of anti-Semitism everywhere, and newspapers and media, just constant coverage, we thought to look at Torah sources for war and peace and try to understand, we'll call it from the practical to the mystical, the energies, the dynamics of war in human history, in Jewish history, the idea of war, the idea of peace. And we will also connect to the time of year. Hanukkah is coming, and there were really two miracles of Hanukkah. One is the well-known miracle of the lights. They only had enough oil for one day and it burned for 8 days. But there's really a second layer of miracle, and that was the war itself. How a very small band of fighters were able to defeat the Greek Empire was quite miraculous. And so it's this time of year, it's exactly what's happening now. Discussions of war and peace, good and evil, light and darkness. This is what is happening. So we will be looking at Torah sources from what's written in the Chumash, what's written in the Tanakh, the prophets, the writings in Chassidut, in Kabbalah, and hopefully we'll come to understand better. And all of our learning should be that we should, a dual purpose, we should be successful in the war that we are fighting now, and that it should ultimately lead us to peace. So I do want to say like a caveat. I remember saying this before the last series also. It goes without saying that there's many stories in the Tanakh about war. There are many verses about peace. Just so many different sources. We can only get to so much one class at a time. So I've chosen to begin with a more philosophical overview of the dynamics that are called behind the foundation of this energy we call war and this energy we call peace. And we want to start by kind of like delving right into the depths of it. And then class after class, we will be picking specific ideas, including different laws, different mitzvot that have to do with war and have to do with peace. And I've also decided that in every class, I don't want it to be all war or all peace. Every class will have a segment about war and a segment about peace. So I want to say right in the beginning that when we talk about war, there are many other words that we can use and we will be using to understand. War is also a battle. War can also be understood as how we overcome obstacles. Our personal battles, our national battles, communal battles, battle on the level of emotion, battle in the very practical world. I think in the world of trying to lose weight, it's called the battle of the bulge. In other words, this is a very, very personal way we relate to war. Again, war has certain connotations, but we want to expand that and the idea of battling, of confronting, because these are challenges and we have to confront certain challenges. So we could call it a war, we could call it a battle, we could call it a confrontation, but it's the same kind of energy. It just depends on what level of intensity that we're talking about. So I want to start with a verse in Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. It's in the 3rd chapter, the beginning of the 3rd chapter. And this is called L'chol Zman V'Eit L'chol Chefetz Tachat HaShamayim. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. So anyone remember back in the 60s, the musical group The Byrds took this part of Ecclesiastes and they put it to, call it folk rock music. And it was a huge hit. It was a huge hit, and it was virtually word for word this section of Ecclesiastes. In this section where it says that there is a time and a purpose for everything under heaven, Shlomo Melech brings 28 times. They're in pairs of 2. So there's 14 pairs of opposites. And 28, of course, is a very significant number because it's the gematria of koach, of strength, energy, potential. But it's also symbolically close to how many days in a month, even though we know that there's approximately 29 and a quarter days in a month. 28 symbolically is a month. Like when we follow the moon, so we talk about a quarter moon and a full moon, and then the waning half moon, and then the new moon. So the 28 times are very, very connected to the concept of the month. And of course, the Jewish calendar is a lunar month, a lunar calendar. So I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just do it in English. So again, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh. Actually, I am going to read all of them. A time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to rend, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace. So that is the last pair, a time of war and a time of peace. So the reason I wanted to start with this is because we don't want to isolate the idea of war and peace. We want to see it in a broader context. So here we see it in a context of opposites, of opposite energies. But the significant thing here is that there is a time for war and there is a time for peace. So all of us would hope, and we'll get to this later, that it would only be peace. Why does there have to be war? But here it's saying, and actually earlier it says, a time to kill and a time to heal. So already we might ask, well, isn't one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not murder? So how can there be a time to kill? And so here we have a very, very important statement that if someone, this is a Jewish stance about life in general, and especially life and death, war and peace. If someone comes to kill you, you get up first and you can kill them. This is what we'll call, in a sense, the opposite of turn the other cheek. I'm not making value judgments here. I'm just presenting the Jewish foundational philosophy that we're talking about, is that we're not expected to turn the other cheek if someone is trying to kill us. It's almost considered unnatural. In other words, it's a God-given right of self-defense. So here again, war and peace is introduced here as part of opposites. Okay, I'm just trying to have people join here. I hope I was successful. Okay, so we began with Ecclesiastes, a time to be born and a time to die, a time for war and a time for peace. The other verse that we want to introduce here that has come up many times is Ze l'umat ze asa Elokim. This against this, or this opposite this, God has made. Now, this is such an important verse about the fabric of the physical universe and the fabric of the spiritual universe, that there is a balance in the world, like the scales of the month of Tishrei. And physically, the way that the world is created, with you have particles and you have antiparticles. You have AC and you have DC. Everything is balanced. This is called the anthropic principle, which looks at all the different factors that allow existence to be maintained, and especially life on this planet. There are so many fine balancing points that if the factors were off, even a minuscule life and existence could not sustain itself, would not be possible. So zeh leumat zeh, God made. This against this opposite this. So here, what Shlomo Melech was saying is, there is a time for war and there is a time for peace. This we will be discussing. This is not something we can do on one foot. We will be discussing from a halachic point of view and from various stories. When is it appropriate to defend yourself, to go to war? When is it appropriate to avoid war at all costs or at partial costs? So here I bring in, it's actually next week's Parsha, but it fits in perfectly here, is when Yaakov is coming back to Eretz Yisrael. And he knows that he's going to have to confront and meet his brother Esav again. When they parted ways, Esav wanted to kill him for taking the blessing that he felt was his. And so Yaakov hears that Esav is coming with 400 men. And Rashi tells us he did three things. And the Torah tells the story, but it says he did three things. He sent him gifts. He tried to placate him. He tried to make peace with him. And he did it through sending gifts and hoping that the symbolism of the gifts would express his wanting to make peace with his brother. And then it says that he prayed, and the Torah actually records his prayer. And then he prepared for war. In the end, he fought with the angel. This is one of the most classic battles in the entire Tanakh. Yaakov fighting with the man, the angel, with himself and with God, all simultaneously. It's all in next week's Parsha. But here we see that Yaakov, he did three things. He tried to make peace. He prayed for a peaceful outcome, and he prepared for war. And in the end, he actually fought. He battled with, like I said, himself, God, an angel, Esav, all of these simultaneously. And so here it's not, there's a lot of gray area, even though we introduced in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for war and there's a time for peace. But in between those poles is a lot of gray area. And so if we talk about war and peace on the level of opposite energies, so we should go back to the very beginning of creation. And the first letter in the Torah, as we know, is a big bet. Bet equals 2. And so we're told right from the beginning that the existential reality of all of existence, and especially this world, is based on dualities. Everything, we live in a bipolar world, a world of opposites and dualities. And one of them is war and peace, but it's only part of a whole dynamic of opposite energies. And so what was created in the first verse? Heaven and earth. And we're told that heaven represents all spiritual reality which would ever be created. And earth represents all physical reality that would ever come into being. And here we see in the word Shemayim, we see that the shin of Shemayim, we spell Shemayim shin mem yud mem. So it's actually shin mayim. Shin represents Aish, and mayim is the actual word for water. So here we see, even in the spiritual world, we have opposites. We have fire and water. And fire can be very positive, or it can be very negative. And same with water. Water can be very positive, or it can be very negative. So here we see already in the first verse, we see the big bet of duality, heaven and earth as a duality. And even in heaven itself, we have Aish and Mayim. And so, like we said, the verse, Zelu madzeh asa Elokim, this against this God made. So the forces that lead to war. And I'm going to say it again because we really have to emphasize this. When we say war, we immediately think of two armies confronting each other. But here, war also means, in the way we're going to use it, is the energy of battle, confrontation, facing obstacles, passing tests, dealing with adversity, pushing oneself to accomplish. All of these have the energy that we're using the word war. But it should be understood throughout this whole series that there's many levels of war on a simple personal level. Emotional, intellectual, psychological, spiritual. So here we have in the first day already the seeds of opposites. If we look at the first day after the opening verse is about darkness and light. The whole first day is darkness and light. And then God divides between the darkness and calls it night, and calls the light day. And then the day ends. Vayhi erev vayivoker yom echad. There was evening and there was morning, one day. And so we learn that the idea that it's one day means even though darkness and light were divided and each had its domain, ultimately there's a unification between even darkness and light. We know from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So here we have classic opposites, and here Adam and Chava were given a choice. They were told not to eat from the tree, but intrinsic in being created in the image of God means that we have free will. And ultimately, they ate from the tree. The tree of life represents where all energy is unified and rectified and can live together, can exist together. But in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there was this division. And that was the first test in human history. Their first test is they were told not to do something. And we know, actually, the phrase is taken from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the phrase is, forbidden fruit always tastes sweeter. And that was the result of their eating of the tree, is that they brought a potential type of evil that one could deal with in a very objective kind of way. And by eating means to ingest, to bring something from the outside into oneself. That's what eating represents, more than just eating food. It means taking something that could be dealt with objectively on the outside and bringing it inside. And so now evil is now on the inside. And that is the battle that we actually fight 24/7. 24/7, our whole lives, is a constant battle between the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, between the good inclination and the evil inclination. And so we could ask, like, why does it have to be this way? And so the answer that we're given is, it's a simple answer, but it's something that we need to integrate and understand, is that God, by giving us free will and by creating us in God's image, means that we have free will. And therefore, if there's no opposites, if there's no evil, if there's no temptation, if there's no forbidden fruits, then there's no choices that are going to be made. God could have created the world absolutely perfect and good, and no Yetzer HaTov, no Yetzer Hara, and we would kind of be like marionettes, that we would just kind of be part of God's play and do as God directs us. But God just wanted more for us, wanted us to earn our own way, to be our own selves. And it's very, very much like parents raising children. Parents have dreams for their children. Parents have incredible love of their children. Parents want their children to learn certain things and walk in a certain way. But we all know that ultimately, children are independent beings. And sometimes it's a hard lesson for parents to learn to let go and allow their children to make choices, because in the end, they will make their choices, no matter how much parents try to control their children. Usually it's counterproductive, that kind of attitude or philosophy. And so we have zeh le'umat zeh. This against this is actually for our good. So we can earn our own way. We can earn our own merit. When Moshe comes back to Egypt, after God choosing him to be the leader at the burning bush, and reveals to him more or less what's going to happen. And he says very, very clearly that you'll go to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's not going to listen to you. And then I will increase my wonders in Egypt, and eventually he'll let you go. So Moshe goes to Pharaoh the first time with the famous plea, let my people go. And Pharaoh basically just laughs at him. And as a result, he doubles their work. They have to now find their own straw to make the mortar to build the buildings. And so when Moshe comes out, he's confronted by Datan and Aviram, and they say to him, You told us you were coming to redeem us, and now it's worse than ever. And so Moshe goes back to God, this is in the Torah itself, and says, Lama hirata la'am hazeh, v'lama shilachtani. Why have you done evil to this people, and why did you send me? So I learned this from Rav Ginsburg. It's a very, very deep idea. It sounds like Moshe didn't understand what was going on here. But at the burning bush, God already said to him, it wasn't going to be so simple. It wasn't going to be like just you'll go into Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And he said, okay, when are you leaving? So what was Moshe asking? What was Moshe asking when he said, why have you done evil to this people? And why did you send me? And God answered, now you'll see the miracles and wonders that I will perform to bring you out of Egypt. So Rav Ginsburg says what Moshe was asking was not really the game plan here. Moshe understood the game plan. He also understood the bigger dynamic of first there's darkness and then there's light. That's why in the second verse of the Torah, darkness is introduced, and only in the third verse is light created. From the darkness comes light. This has a lot to do with the upcoming holiday of Hanukkah, which is coming in the darkest time of the year. So Moshe was saying, God, it's not like I don't understand the dynamic of first there's exile and then there's redemption, the darkest hours before the dawn. But why have you done evil to this people? Your people are suffering. You are God. You could make it any way you want. And so Rav Ginsburg says Moshe was asking the greatest existential question that could be asked. God, why have you chosen this dynamic of exile and redemption, first darkness and then light, free will, all these choices? Why is there evil in the world? Why is there evil in the world? So he was asking the deepest existential question. And the only way we can answer it, is that ultimately it's for our good. Ultimately, it's for us to be able to make the right choices and to be a partner with God in bringing the light and bringing the redemption. So now just to expand on something that we said already, that if we talk about war and peace, there's war and peace between nations. There's war and peace on a more global level. World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. That's what many people thought. Many people thought is there's a certain aggressive evil in this world that we have to confront, because if we don't confront it, it will swallow up the world. But this will be a war to end all wars. And for those who know history, know that World War II was just an extension of World War I. It was as if there was just like a 20-year gap in there. And in World War II, it was this feeling that if Hitler is not stopped, then he will conquer the world, and evil will reign. And so therefore we have to fight it. And of course, this is the feeling that is happening in Israel now and among Jews all over the world. And this this we'll get to more. So we have war, big wars, world wars. In Parshat Lech Lecha, some people refer to the war of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings as the first world war. Because there's nothing like that described beforehand, that you had all these countries on one side and all these countries on another side fighting this major war. But there's also, as we've said, the idea of battle, of struggle, of confrontation on a personal level, within oneself or between individual people. And so we see that in Parsha Ki Teitzei, in the book of Devarim, where it says, Ki Teitzei lemilchama al oivecha, when you go to war against your enemy. And throughout Chassidut, it says this is talking about not just a war between nations, it's talking about the day in, day out battle, struggle that every individual goes through with the Yetzer Hara and all the temptations of this world. And of course, when we pass our tests, we become much better for it. And here we see, again, it's next week's Parsha, but when Yaakov fights with the angel, we'll call it the angel for right now, even though I've said when we really delve into it, and anyone who has Orchard of Delights can look in Parshat V'Yetzei, this week's Parsha, and I go into great depths, this idea how Yaakov is fighting on 4 different levels simultaneously. He's fighting against Esav, he's fighting the angel of Esav, he's fighting himself over his own destiny and the choices that he's made, and he's fighting with God. He even says that when the angel changes his name, and he says, your name is now Yisrael, so the Torah explains what the name means. Yisrael is Ki Sarita im Elokim ve'anashim ve'tuchal. You contended, you fought with God and man, and you prevailed. That is the definition of Yisrael. And so Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz has a book of collected essays called Strife of the Spirit. It's short essays, many different essays. And the first one is called The Strife of the Spirit. And the whole book is named after this first essay. And he says, talking about the name Yisrael, and he said that our destiny is to struggle. That is the destiny of Am Yisrael. And he says, though, that Yisrael is a metaphor, an allegory, an example of the whole human condition. And he explains that in modern times, the pursuit of peace is all-encompassing. That is the goal. And Rabbi Steinsaltz says it's true, but that is not our reality now. And to live in a reality that we pretend that everything can just snap our fingers and be peaceful is not realistic. He said the human condition, the condition of Yisrael, is to struggle. And he says that struggle is not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily negative. To struggle means to attain, to be successful, to accomplish. But we don't accomplish anything. Very, very few things in life are handed to us on golden platters. Almost everything needs work and focus and struggle. But it doesn't mean that it's negative. So he's saying that it would be better to accept this idea of ongoing struggle than to fight against it. But then he says, but of course there are moments of peace, like Shabbat, and a person can attain inner peace. But to think that we could avoid the struggles and the trials and tribulations of life, he says, is very unrealistic, and it's not a positive attitude. It's a very deep essay, because he really just kind of cuts through and dispels a lot of illusions. So up to now, we've been trying to place war and peace in a bigger context, a context of light and darkness, exile and redemption, good and evil, all opposites, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. And we just have the reality of that there is this dynamic of war in the world, struggle, in the theory of evolution. So it could be called the survival of the fittest, that there's something built into nature itself that is a struggle of the fittest. And we could see it in the animal world. We could see it in the human world, but even in the vegetable kingdom, where if you have, whether it's a forest or a garden, but if you have plants that are too close together, then what happens is the plants are forced into competition for the limited amount of minerals that are available in the soil, the water that is available. And even in the vegetable kingdom, the individual plants will fight for survival. And in much of the animal world, of course, we have domesticated animals, but if we look at the entire spectrum of the animal world, it is kill or be killed, the survival of the fittest. And so I've thought about this a lot, like Moshe's question, like, why does it have to be this way? Like, what is it intrinsic in reality that there is a fight for survival, and that survival sometimes can only exist with the defeat or the death of someone or something else? And so one day I just had, to me at least, it was an epiphany, is that as human beings, we know that the name Adam, we can explain it according to its syllables. The Aleph is the spiritual component of a human being, the soul, the divine spark of a human being. And the dam means blood, is the body, the lower soul, the animal soul. And that a human being is a composite. So here again, we see in one reality, one entity, a human being, we are a composite of really two very, very different energies. And of course, all of life, 24/7, is a struggle to find a balance, a peaceful balance between the soul and the body. So this struggle goes on all the time. Again, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily negative, because when we succeed, we reach very, very high levels of spirituality. And so I realized that, and this is going to take us into the component of this first class of peace, is that the challenge, the trial for humanity is to rise above this fight for survival. But like Rav Steinsaltz said, not to ignore it or deny it, but to rise above it as much as we can in our personal lives, our communal lives, national life, and hopefully universal life, and have the Aleph of Adam rule over the Dam and lift up the body, lift up the Yetzer Hara, lift up the forces of that bring us down. And so that leads us into the vision of Mashiach. Because here we see that all of reality, including nature, even the mineral world, where you have particles and antiparticles, and they actually are destroying each other. They're like nullifying each other. And this is like happening all of the time. And in the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, you have zeh le'umat zeh. But when you get to the human kingdom, there is a vision that we can overcome this, that we can get beyond the polarities. We say it every day in the Shema, where we come to understand that war and peace, darkness and light, there is a unity between them. And again, we're using the word war in its broadest sense of struggle, of challenge, of battle. And we bring it together. The phrase is, if you have lemons, make lemon juice out of it. You put in a little honey and sugar, and you have a sweet drink. Doesn't have to be bitter. You turn bitter into sweet. And so the vision of Mashiach is this idea of getting beyond all of these dualities and enter into a consciousness of really what the Shema is, Hashem Echad, but that it will be a reality that will totally infuse our consciousness. And that's why in the Psalms, and again, as I said in the beginning, I can just introduce ideas here. I have actually scores and scores and scores and scores of sources that hopefully we will get to. But one of them it's in the Psalms and it's in the prophets, this idea that a day is coming that's neither night or day. It will all be light. will all be light. In Yeshayahu, he says about the future that death will be swallowed up forever. If we're talking about opposites, that was the first of the 28 times, a time to be born and a time to die. In this world, the way it is now, everything that's born dies, whether it's a tree or a vegetable or an animal or a human. When it's born, eventually it will die. But we're told there will be a time that will take us beyond the division of life and death. And so when we talk about peace, I'm going to just introduce these ideas now, and we will go back over almost everything I said tonight. We are going to go back over in different ways and different forms. But in the Torah, one of the most important mentions of peace is in Birchat Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohen, which we still do. It's one of the few things from the temple we still maintain and do. In Eretz Yisrael, we do it every day. But there, the last word of Birchat Kohanim is peace. V'yaseh lecha shalom. Peace. The last word of the Amidah that we pray 3 times a day, the cardinal prayer of Judaism, is the Baruch atah Hashem v'barech et amo Yisrael ba shalom. It's the last word of the Amidah. In Kaddish ends with shalom. And the last Mishnah of the whole oral Torah states that God found no vessel for blessing better than peace. Peace is the ultimate vessel of blessing. So we see that the vision, the hope, the experience of peace is the, in a sense, the ultimate goal. Peace of mind, shalom bayit, peace in the home, peace in the world, because that is the messianic vision, that there will be peace in the world. So here we see the importance of peace, which again is the counter action of war. And even in war, the goal is always that if we have to fight, that there has to be a war, that it should lead to peace. That should be like the goal. It should lead to peace. And even now, in the midst of a very difficult situation that the Jewish people are in, and Israel is in, and soldiers are dying every day. Our enemy is dying every day. Civilians on both sides are dying. But ultimately is the hope that by being victorious, it will lead to peace. Not everyone sees it this way. For certain dictators, empires along the way, war was just a means to attain power and rule over other people and get the spoils of war and get the money and get the land. And there wasn't a goal of peace. But for the Jewish people, that if there has to be war, it's in order that it should bring peace. And we'll see that more when we come to one of the many examples is with Pinchas, where Pinchas kills Zimri and Cosby, which accomplished stopping a plague that was killing thousands of people. And he was rewarded with a Briti Shalom, God's covenant of peace. And so we'll discuss how can that be? How can you merit a covenant of peace through killing? And we will answer that. So just to sum up, and I'll end that, that in this world, the greatest experience of peace is Shabbat. And that's why the greeting on Shabbat is Shabbat Shalom. That the greeting is not just a simple expression that we throw out there. That is the essence of Shabbat. The experience of Shabbat is a return to the Garden of Eden. It's a return to a reality, a consciousness of total peace. So we'll end this class with, again, dedicating it to, though it may seem paradoxical, but this is a war that we need to win now. We need to win not just for Israel. We need to win it for the whole world. Even if a lot of the world doesn't understand that yet. But at the same time, that we're hoping that by being victorious, and hopefully all of the hostages coming home in good health, that it will bring peace. And I'll just mention with something that many people have pointed out, all of the Arab countries that have made peace with us made peace when they came to the conclusion that either, after trying many times, especially Egypt and Jordan, after trying many times to destroy us, they came to the conclusion that they couldn't, and that it was too high of a price for them to pay anymore to try. So they made peace. The Abraham Accords were made with countries farther from our borders, and not necessarily they were trying to destroy us, but they came to the conclusion that instead of siding with those who want to destroy us, that there's more benefit to them to make peace with us. And so I believe that is the hope now also, that as long as our enemies, who have very publicly, without any embarrassment or shame, have announced that their goal is the destruction of Israel. So as we started, if someone gets up to kill you, you have the right to defend yourself. That is what is happening right now. And we're hoping that at a certain point, all of our enemies will come to the conclusion that they cannot destroy us, and that it's to their benefit to make peace with us. I pray that that's what will happen, and I pray that it happens very, very soon.